Today we're going to be making these silly little bird familiars from the Delicious in Dungeon anime. I'll also be answering some of your questions, so here we go! While Link here helps me decide how large to make my familiars, let's look at our first question. What inspired you to start making miniatures based on Delicious in Dungeon? This guy right here. His name is Tom, and he's one of the best toy photographers in the world. A few months ago, he asked me if I thought I could make the pumpkin guys from this series, and I was like, I don't know, but I think it'd be fun to try. So he was actually the catalyst for my Delicious in Dungeon builds. So thank you again, Tom, you're the best. I was also a big fan of the series before his request, and I was excited to get started on making miniatures from it, but I didn't really have anything planned before the pumpkins. Here I'm trying to make the first familiar and its wings in one go, and I quickly realize I won't be able to get the shape of the torso how I want it by doing it this way. So for my second attempt, I start by just making the torso and adding some little leg holes on the bottom. I also make one of the long dragon torsos, and then I bake those. And I later start molding the wings on top of the already baked torso. Alright, next question. How did you first get into miniature making and clay sculpting? My interest in miniature making was actually a byproduct of me getting into toy photography back in 2016. I was taking pictures of my Toon Link Nendroid doing silly things around the house, and then I wanted to start making props for him and his shop diorama. And it just took off from there. Anytime I had an idea for a photo of my Nendroids or other action figures, and I didn't have the props I needed for them, I'd usually attempt to make them first. I started working with polymer clay too, again for the same reason, for the sake of making props for my action figures. And my love of clay in general began in high school, where I took like 3 years of ceramic classes, and it was my absolute favorite thing ever. And my teacher was so awesome too, that I would sometimes even eat lunch in his classroom. Look at this little guy, he's almost done. Okay, next question. If you could instantly master one new crafting skill, what would it be and why? I honestly don't think I would feel happy showing off a crafting skill if it was something that I instantly mastered, because for me, a lot of my enjoyment of a new skill is the process of actually learning the skill. That said though, I think it would be cool to eventually get into 3D printing, but I don't think that'll happen until I have a few projects that would significantly benefit from it. And I really enjoy the process of hand making things, so 3D printing would just be supplemental to my process if I ever incorporate it. Here I'm giving my second hot doggy familiar some crossed arms, because I couldn't not make my own version of this guy. Question number 4. What appliance do you use to bake your clay? This baby right here. Since polymer clay is supposedly non-toxic, it's not an issue to use my food oven for clay baking, or curing as it's supposed to be called. I just set the oven to 270 degrees Fahrenheit. It's supposed to be set to 275 according to the clay instructions, but my oven only does 10-degree increments, and I don't want to burn the clay. And so I set it to the bake setting and hope for the best. There have been a few rare times where my clay pieces burned, and I'm honestly not sure what caused that, but I have found when baking thin, light-colored pieces that they are prone to burning, and it's best if I put an aluminum foil tent over them while they bake to minimize the chances of them burning. Oh my goodness, this guy's facial expression is my favorite. Here I'm attaching raw clay legs to him because I found that it was kind of annoying to try to attach the baked legs that I had previously made for him and the other familiars. And being able to shape the legs to look a little derpy and squished made these guys extra cute. Question number 5. How do you determine what you want to make, especially IRL foods? I usually find foods that I like to eat or that I just think are pretty to look at, and also that look approachable to make. So that's my starting point. Beyond that, I sometimes try to find foods that can serve as components for other miniature meals. So for example, eggs, bacon, and bread are things that can be used and combined for different meal scenes. Next question, which is 6 out of 10 if you were curious. Do you watch any shows or anything for inspiration when you need a break? I usually play video games when I need a break from crafting, and that can sometimes give me new sources of inspiration for prop making. For me, watching shows doesn't usually feel as relaxing or rewarding for my brain, at least not the way that video games or pancakes do, but I do like to watch shows sometimes for the sake of getting new crafting ideas or reference material. This pancake was so good, I should make one again soon. While I work on my dragon familiar's head, let's look at our next question. Do you have any tips for photographing miniatures? As someone who only uses their phone camera for videos and photos, I don't know that I'm the best person to ask, but there are two major things that I do pretty consistently in my toy photography. The first is that I typically take the photos from low camera angles rather than from above the toys. That makes the miniatures look more lifelike, since it looks like you're right there with them at their eye level rather than from a bird's eye view. The second thing is relying on natural light, specifically soft afternoon light, for most of my photos. I personally just love the way that the photos look when they're lit by soft, gentle light. But my recommendation would be to play around with different light sources, even artificial lighting setups, or combining artificial and natural light to see what you like best. Question number 8. How long does it typically take you to complete a project? Let me preface this by saying that I am terrible at keeping track of time when I'm crafting things. But if you want to hear my very inaccurate estimate, I can at least tell you how many days it takes me. So in terms of days, which can be anywhere from 1 hour to 6 hours of work in each of those days, most of my miniature builds take about a week or two to complete. So if I were to quantify that into hours, it would be like 20 to 50 hours for one project. And that doesn't include video editing, which adds another 10 or more hours to the project. Here I'm making the first wing for my dragon familiar, which I didn't want to make a second time, so you'll see later in this video that I make a mold for it, which is kind of silly in hindsight because I only made one of these dragons, so I guess that means I need to make more little dragons in the future? Alright, question number 9. How do you come up with ideas for new projects? It usually starts with a show or game that I love, that I either get an action figure for, like Link, or that I think I can make a clay version of, like this adorable little guy. And then I decide if I should make a diorama for the character, based on how many vague photo shoot ideas I can come up with for them. So my Hateno Village diorama, for example, is great for photos of Link, Epona, Link's wagon, any Pokemon figures I make, and any outdoor picnic-style food setups. And the photo shoot ideas are basically just me thinking about what scenes would be cute or funny or silly in any given diorama, which is at least partially inspired by the characters of whatever show or video game I'm working with. Now for our last question. What's your favorite miniature you've made so far and why? My pumpkin dudes, for sure. If I had to pick one specific one, it's this guy in particular. And that's partly because Tom did an amazing job making this guy's eyes look so dreamy. But the main reason that the pumpkin guys are my favorite, though, is that I wasn't confident I could make these guys at all and actually be happy with how they turned out. But after 2 months of practice and 20-ish pumpkin dudes made, I was pretty happy with about half of them. With our questions done, let's see where we're at. Oh right, the dragon wing molds. Once I had 2 wings made using the mold, I trimmed them down to their proper length and glued them onto the dragon body, and bake them one at a time. The reason I didn't attach both wings before baking is that I was worried they'd sag or fall off in the oven because I wasn't quite sure how I'd prop the dragon up to prevent that from happening. But luckily you just have to bake clay glued things for about 5 minutes, or maybe less, for it to begin curing. So I just baked one side for 5 minutes and then attached the second wing and baked again for another 10 minutes. Then I filled the gaps between the wings and the body with some more hot dog colored clay. And I also added his little eye dots on off camera and baked him one last time. I got this set of 5 blank nesting dolls from Amazon for $10, specifically because it has a good variety of bowl mold sizes for my future bowl making needs. And even if I don't use them for molds in the future, I can use them as a fun painting project for me and my daughter to do. Since I'll be making a large bowl for my familiars to stand in, I roll out a sheet of extra firm cos clay and flatten it over the largest nesting doll's head. I also trim off the excess clay so that I can more easily flatten my clay sheet over the nesting doll. And then I rub some youth serum onto the clay to make sure it doesn't age prematurely. After baking, I remove the rough bowl from the nesting doll, and I noticed that there's some air bubbles on it. But luckily they're on the bottom of the bowl, where hopefully they won't be seen. Next, I trim the bowl to try to make it as even as possible, and I wet sand it to minimize how much clay dust I breathe in. And since I'm always compelled to make things more than once, especially when they're quick builds, I went ahead and made a second bowl, which didn't have air bubbles in it, but it did have a huge crack through half of it. But I'm gonna use the second bowl because I was able to cut and sand the edge to look more even on this one than on the first one. Now it's time to give my bowl some handles. So I start this by shaping 2 balls of clay into rough block shapes, and then I attach them onto the bowl before baking them for about 15 minutes. After baking, I remove the handles and then I trim them so that they actually resemble handles. And before reattaching the handles to the bowl for their final baking, I add some thin strips of clay to them to resemble the fabric portion of the handles. After its final baking, my bowl gets a nice coat of gunmetal acrylic paint and a dry brushing of slightly lighter gunmetal acrylic. The fabric handles, or are they leather maybe, get a cream acrylic paint coat. And a nice dark brown wash to bring out some of the details. And for the varnishing step, the bowl gets some matte Mod Podge, and the handles get some regular matte acrylic varnish. Before we start our photo shoot, I'd like to thank my daughter for requesting I make these guys. Thank you so much, honey. I also need to make some temporary stands for them, so that I could easily have them stand without having to use sticky tack. So I used some thin clear plastic and some double-sided tape for this. And the reason I chose this over sticky tack is that it would be easier to edit the stands out of my photos with a clear base rather than an opaque one. All right, time for our photo shoot. If you have any questions you'd like me to answer in a future video, please let me know. Thank you so much again for watching, and I'll see you next time.